The man behind the curtain, good news without tricks. The Wizard of Oz is one of my favorite movies, obviously. And I rewatched this one scene in preparation for you tonight, and I want to remind you of what happened in this iconic American movie scene, where Dorothy and her friends come back with the Wicked Witch of the West broom, and they lay it down, and there's that huge head of the Wizard of Oz. And as Dorothy lays down the broom, she says, "We've done what you told us. We brought you the broom of the Wicked Witch of the West, and we melted her." And the wizard says, "You liquidated her, huh? Very resourceful." And Dorothy says, "So we'd like you to keep your promise, sir." "Not so fast. Go away and come back tomorrow." And that's when you see all Dorothy and her friends, their faces fall. And Dorothy says, "But I want to go home now. We've done what you asked." And the wizard says, "Do not arouse the wrath of the great and terrible Oz. I said come back tomorrow." And then Dorothy says, "If you really were great and powerful, you would keep your promises. Do you presume to criticize the great Oz, you ungrateful creatures? Think yourself lucky. I'm giving you an audience tomorrow and not in 20 years. And at that moment, little Toto runs up and notices that there's a curtain, and he begins to slowly slide it open. And while the wizard is yelling at them to be grateful, to humble themselves before him, all of a sudden the real wizard behind the curtain looks around and does this sort of squeal that I love, this sort of, yeah. "The great Oz has spoken. Ah! Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain." But the charade is over at that moment. Dorothy and her friends come creeping up to the man, and they ask him who he is. And he says into the microphone, "I am the great and terrible Oz." And that's when they start to interview him, and they realize that they have had a joke played on him. And it's a moment that I think really describes the way people in this world see our God. They think that the God of Israel is a lot of smoke and lightning and fear-mongering. And they sense that when we try to tell them about him, we're only doing it out of fear. The world learns about our God by the way we evangelize. And one of the ways I think we evangelize is I've spent a lot of time watching chipmunks in our woods in Colorado. And the way chipmunks gather food is kind of like the way we evangelize. They creep out really fast, they grab something, and they run back to their home and they hide it. And some of us have learned to evangelize with that same kind of fear. We run out into the world, we tell them something good about God, and then we run back to our little home that's safe, or our university that's safe. We witness kind of like we're going to be evaluated afterwards, and the great, mighty God is going to tell us if we passed the test or we failed. And I don't know about you, but if I know I'm going to be evaluated afterwards, it kills my incentive to do things naturally. It's kind of like driving. Not yesterday, it feels like yesterday. This morning when I was driving to the airport in Colorado, I passed 3 cops, and every time I passed a cop, the first thing I did? Pulled my foot off the accelerator, even though I happened to be going the speed limit 2 of those 3 times. And I looked down immediately, what speed am I going? And I'm going to be completely honest, even if I'm not breaking a single law, I breathe a sigh of relief when that cop disappears in my rearview mirror. Because his job is to evaluate me and to see if I'm wanting. It's the same thing when you go to a party at the beach and everyone's in their swimsuits, and because we have not learned how to appreciate the differences in bodies, women and men, as you walk by someone you know is watching you, what do? You pull your tummy in just a little. Right? Because you think you're going to be evaluated. Now, if this were a mixed audience of different ages, and as my grandparents probably know very well, there comes a time when you say, "I cannot hold my tummy in forever. I'm just going to be me." if we approach sharing the good news as if God is a cop and we're being evaluated on a stage, we will kill our spiritual small talk. Why would people want our God if they think he's someone who's watching over our shoulder to mark us down if we get things wrong? See, I think somewhere someone perpetuated this myth about the judgment seat of Christ. And they taught us that one day you're going to stand before God and he's going to judge you for all the things you've done. And I think it must have been a youth pastor, nothing against youth pastors, but some youth pastor, I think, was trying to get really creative, and they came up with this analogy that just like these screens up here, all of your sins are one day going to be shown on a big screen, and God will judge you. Every lustful thought, every evil, revengeful spirit, every fantasy you had is going to be put on a big screen in heaven, and then God's going to judge you. And that's when you're going to be really grateful for Jesus. Now that I'm a parent of a 2.5-year-old, I know that if God is even a tiny bit like the good parents on earth, when he wants to talk about his children, he does what parents on earth do. Even when I'm judging my son, I want to look and show the world the fun, sweet, best moments of his life. The email forwards that parents send to their friends are not of the moments their child is screaming at their face, "I hate broccoli!" They're the moments when their son brings them a flower or bends down and pets a dog that's hurting, or stands up and wins a gold for some speech meet, or makes that home run. The moments that God is showing off to the world, to the angels, to all the people in heaven are not going to be the moments when we fall flat on our faces. They're going to be the moments when you showed the world what he was like. Because our God is a good Father. And we don't have to be in fear that he's docking our points because that last person we shared Jesus with didn't come to Christ. There's a quote in one of my favorite C.S. Lewis books, Till We Have Faces, where Oriole, the main character, realizes that no man will love her if she doesn't have a beautiful face. And she says, "No man will love you, though you gave your life for him, unless you had a beautiful face. I would try to fix my body with new devices, with the way I did my hair, or the colors I wore, or a new ribbon. But no man will love you unless you have a pretty face. So perhaps are the gods. They will not love you. However you try to please them, the gods will not love you, no matter what you suffer, unless you have that beauty of soul." And I'm afraid that sometimes we come across to this world as if we believe God doesn't love us when we're deep in lust. Or God doesn't love us when we trip up and we think bitter thoughts towards someone we're supposed to love. Or God doesn't love us when we fail to do our best. And so we try harder and harder. And it comes out in the way we evangelize. Some of us are evangelizing because we're afraid. We're afraid that person's going to go to hell. We're afraid if we don't, what does that say about our commitment to Jesus? And at core, we're afraid that we're not going to get God's approval. But I'm here tonight to tell you that God is not like the Wizard of Oz. He doesn't need us to go to the Wicked Witch of the West and get her broomstick, because he's already done that. We have freedom to mess up when we evangelize. We can say all the wrong things, and if that person is owned by God, they will find him. So I want to invite you tonight to consider that the way we talk about Jesus with our friends must first start with what we think about God. Are you talking about a God of evaluation who's weighing your good and your bad? Or are you talking about God, like in the parable in Luke 15? Do you remember the series of parables? The lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son, also called the prodigal son. Are you talking about a God who rejoices when you get it right, or a God who looks at you and says, well, it's about time? Some of us can't share good news because, frankly, we're not sure there is any. We think deep down that the good news goes like this. You're all screwed up. God died for you. I know that sounds great, and it is, but here's the catch. Now you have to live for him. And everyone we talk to about the good news knows there's a catch, and they don't want to buy in. I want you to consider tonight and for the next week if you think it's possible for the prodigal son's older brother to evangelize. The older brother who stayed home and did all the right things, and when the younger son comes back and the dad kills the calf and they all have this huge party that lasts all night, and I'm sure there was plenty of eating and drinking, and comes to his dad and says, why didn't you throw me a party? I stayed here the whole time. And the dad looks at him with his eyes wide and said, son, everything I have is for you. We could have had a party anytime. Some of us, actually, I would say a majority of us in this audience, it ticks you off that people can come to God at the end of their life and make a mess of it and still be invited into the kingdom. And we don't know the God who is rich in mercy, and so we can't talk about that good news. We don't even have the vocabulary for it. So how do we share good news? Number one, every time you talk with somebody, expect to learn something about God from them. There was a girl I ran into when I had first moved to Steamboat. I'm going to call her Penny because one day she may hear this talk, and I want her to know that I kept her identity private. She and I became friends very quickly because when she checked me out of the store, I looked down at her behind that cashier stand, and I saw that across her chest, and she was wearing a very low-cut top, across her chest was tattooed the words, "Under Grace." And I thought, aha, I found a Christian. And I was so excited to have a spiritual conversation with her. And so I asked her, oh, what does your tattoo mean? And she had a look in her eyes when she looked up at me. It was kind of like a veiled, like a wall had gone up. And I didn't expect that. Most time, I love asking people about their tattoos. It's fascinating because to do something that permanent means usually, unless you were drunk at the time, something very significant. And I want to know what's significant in the people's lives I get to come across. I want to know what they cared about enough to put in permanent ink on their bodies. So I asked her, what does that mean? She said, well, it's not religious. Under grace is not religious. Someone told me that it's in the Bible, but I'm not religious, so it's not from the Bible. And I could tell she was upset about it. So I didn't tell her that in the Bible it says not to cut yourself or give yourself tattoos. I told her instead, which we can all talk about later if you want to know what I really think of that verse. I told her instead, well, what does it mean to you? And she said, well, I've been in some really dark places for me and really bad spots. And I realized that the only reason I'm here today in a job, working steady, is because I gave myself grace. I said, oh, so you're under the grace you gave yourself? She said, yes, exactly. There's nothing so encouraging to someone to know they've been heard. So we talked a little bit more. I bumped into her in town later, which is one of the really nice things about living in a small town. And she was pregnant at the time, and I was pregnant, and so there's a natural connection there, just like when you find out someone loves knitting or collecting mice, there's a connection. So we started started talking, and every time I saw her, like, oh, how soon are you due? And are you gonna go natural or cesarean or epidural? I mean, there's so many things to talk about when you're pregnant. So we connected, but not real deep. Not like that first conversation. I find I'm good in the first conversations to go deep, and then time passes, and it's usually just lighter, connecting life stuff. Years go by. I run into her and her boyfriend and their son, and then I have my son, and we compare how big the boys are, and it's fun. And then just 2 weeks ago, I saw her at the grocery store. She was working at Starbucks there, and I went up to her and I said, Penny, how are you? How are things with your boyfriend and your son? She's like, oh, husband. I'm like, oh, you got married? That's awesome, cool. And she's like, yeah, well, we're getting a divorce. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. What happened? Oh, he cheated on me. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. That is so annoying when men cheat on you. And she was able to laugh about it because it was such a heavy moment. We were kind of laughing about how awful it was. And we started talking, and she shared a little bit about just the loneliness of that. And I asked her some more questions, and I realized she shared something very personal with me. So I'm going to take the vulnerable step to ask her how that changed her. So I asked her, since the divorce, how has your thoughts about love and marriage and forever changed? And she said, I used to think my boyfriend and I, we had what it took. We could make it. And it was like my rock, she said. But now that we couldn't even make it, I know nothing lasts. Nothing. So I'm trying to listen well, and I say, so are you feeling like really hopeless? She's like, no, not hopeless, realistic. Whoa, I'm so sorry. Now, at that point, she doesn't want pity. Can you tell by the tone of voice? She does not want pity. So I took a bolder stance, and I decided I was going to take the plunge, and I was going to introduce God into the conversation. I said to her, Penny, how has the divorce changed your feelings about God? That's taking a big risk. I didn't know what Penny thought about God. I knew she didn't really like the Bible. I don't know what she thought about God. And she said, my opinions about God haven't changed much, really. She said she used to go to church. She said that when she was a young girl, things happened to her that should never happen to anyone. She said she used to pray when she was 5 years old that God would stop it. She said, where was God? People come in the store all the time. They come and get drinks, and they're total Bible thumpers, and they try to get me to go to church with them. They try to tell me that God has a purpose for everything. Sometimes I go to church with them, but I really don't see what the point is. Where was God when I prayed to him? So I'm listening to her, reflecting back. She's sharing deep personal things with me in the middle of the grocery store at Starbucks. And I say, I bet you feel alone when people don't seem to understand what you went through. Yes, exactly. So I nailed it. I felt really good. I was listening to her. I was picking up what she was putting down. And sometimes that is enough just to be heard. But I sensed God pushing me a little farther. And so I said this. I asked her this question. So when you went to church as a young girl, did you ever remember hearing a Sunday school story about what Jesus said when he hung on the cross? And just saying those words, church, Sunday school, Jesus, cross. I mean, all those are major buzzwords for people to turn off. But because we were talking about something personal to her life, she listened and she waited. And she said, no, I don't remember hearing any words from Jesus on the cross. Now, at that point, I could have shared a lot of words because Jesus said a lot of words from the cross. But instead, I told her the one thing that is actually the crisis point of Christianity, because we try to understand why would God say something like that. And I told her, Jesus said, God, why have you forsaken me? And she looked at me. I could see in her eyes, she was kind of like, why are you sharing that? That doesn't help your case. But she didn't say that. She just kind of looked at me, and I said, I just wanted to share that because it reminds me of you. Now, in my mind, as a trained apologist, I already have a bunch of things I could share, but I could tell at that moment that was all she wanted. That was enough, because she said right back to me, people tell me that if a rapist says he's sorry, God's gonna let him into heaven. And I tell them, if God's gonna let a rapist into heaven, I wanna go to hell. At that point, I knew that my role was to reflect back to her, I totally understand how you could feel like that. I don't need to defend my God. I don't need to rope her into the kingdom. I don't need to invite her to go to church. I just need to listen to her pain. We talked a little bit about my son, Finn, who was eating another sugar packet there at the Starbucks counter. And I told her, I probably should get going. I shared that story on my blog last week as I was praying in anticipation for coming here to be with you. And I sensed that God was saying, you need to go back to the grocery store and bring her a book. And so the next time I went, I looked for her, she wasn't there. The next time I went, which was just Tuesday, 2 days ago, she was there, and I had the book in my hand. It's a book that's helped me a lot understand sexual abuse. It's called Stumbling Toward Faith, My Longing to Heal from the Evil God Allowed. So I walked up to her and I asked her how her son was, how she was doing. She told me a big, long story about a guy who was hitting on her at the bar last night. We talked, we laughed, and then I said, I've been thinking a lot about what you shared a week and a half ago, and I wanted to share. There have been some really dark times in my life too, and I wondered where God was. And there's a book that actually is my favorite book on sexual abuse, and I wanted to give it to you. And you could just see her eyes like, what? And I pulled the book out and I said, you don't have to read it, but it's really short, and I gave her a summary of it, and I handed it to her, and she's like, is this like one of those Christian books? I'm like, yeah, it is a Christian book, but it's not a typical Christian book. In it, the opening page is this girl, and she's being raped by her father, and her father is saying the Lord's Prayer while he rapes her. And I could just see her eyes grow big, and she said, is this book gonna make me sick? And I didn't say a word, and she said, it probably is. I probably should read it. And I said, well, if you don't like it, it's okay. If there are things in it you feel like, this is right, this is a great point, I'd love to know. If there are things you hate, that's fine. If you don't want to finish it, it's fine too. Just let me know, I'll take it back. But I just wanted you to notice the subtitle, because it says, my longing to heal from the evil God allowed. Just isn't that cool? It doesn't say the evil God caused. Isn't that interesting? And that's when her eyes met mine, and I could tell she got it, but she wasn't giving me any feedback other than that. And then I realized she put it in her bag. She's like, I'll probably read it all one day. I love books. I love reading. I'm like, who would have thought? Who would have thought? The Holy Spirit obviously thought. What's so cool about that is the story isn't over. She's not going to read the book and come to church this Sunday. This is a long, long relationship I'm planning to have with her. And I want to see God save her, not me. I'm getting so passionate up here, I just keep seeing spit fly out of my mouth. That is so embarrassing. Oh, well. Okay. I love that you guys are clapping for that. Okay. I want to move to the next section of my talk, which is going to be kind of practicing some tips, top like 4 or 5 tips on how to share the good news. Just gave you a story of how to do it, and I want to give you some actual tips. Here's a challenging thought. Every single person you meet, atheists, Christians, Muslims, Mormons, Wiccans, you name it, is made in God's image. Anne Lamott says, you know you've created God in your image when God hates all the same people you do. So I want to practice with you tonight in the last 20 minutes, a chance to walk into the words of an atheist woman and find out she might actually tell you something about God. Sounds risky, right? Let me introduce you to someone I've come to know and befriend named Vicki Garrison. Vicki came out of a very spiritually abusive fundamentalist Christian movement. She has since found herself turning her back on God because she didn't find God to be good. There's quite a long story of her deconversion at my blog, rubyslippers.org. If you want to read more, you can look up Female Apologist. That's the name of the blog post. Ms. Garrison has a single mother of 7. She runs an online ministry called No Longer Quivering. And I would call her a powerful atheist. She tweets to 13,000 followers. She writes with a team of women of a blog post called Love, Joy, Feminism, mostly atheistic feminist women. And that blog site gets 250,000 views per month. I asked Vicki to tell me some things I could share with you about what Christians could do to share their faith better. So let's learn from an atheist. Number one, oh, and by the way, some of you like freaked out. This is like a crazy idea. Every single thing that she shared with me are all biblical truths, okay? Number one, stop dominating, start discussing. Vicki said that if your idea of a respectful spiritual dialogue is for you to have the high moral high ground, and everyone else is in these lowly planes of mumbling and bumbling and bumping around, you're never gonna have a good dialogue. She said, come to the table as equals, be respectful, be a good listener. If someone says something you disagree with, don't spit out your coffee or roll your eyes or grimace or check your watch. Actually listen to them as if they cared enough about their opinion to research and think about it. For the sake of time, I'm actually not going to share. I have another story, but I'm not going to share it, I think, right now. I'm going to jump to the second one. Number two. Let me illustrate this one with a story. I went to the Mormon Tabernacle once on a tour, and we walked into the big auditorium. Our tour guide, who was a woman, said, now as you walk into this room, can't you just feel the presence of God here? That peace you feel is God present with us. And that he uses this building for great acts of his spirit. And I looked at my husband like, I don't feel anything. Just totally disrespectful. But that's a good example of the way atheists sometimes feel when Christians quote verses to them that mean a lot to them, but don't mean anything or even mean harmful things to an atheist. And Vicki actually gives an example. She says, John 3:16 means a lot to you guys. But to me, John 3:16 taught me to equate love with martyrdom. That way of thinking led me unnecessarily to risk my life and nearly lose it on several occasions. She says, I hear God so loved the world that he gave, which to me sounds like love and goodness and like human flourishing. She says those words to her bring flashbacks of near-death experiences. She says, before you preach at me, get to know me well enough to know better than to quote that evil Bible verse at me. You sense some unresolved angst? Here's my tip. If you're going to share the word of God, find out what they need to hear first. There are words in Scripture that have been used to abuse people, and we want them to hear fresh passages. That's one of the best things about reading Scripture. Find the verse that speaks to you, and as you talk to people, see if it could speak to them after you listen. Vicki recommended we just become better informed. Now, if you got any degree in apologetics or philosophy of religion, this is very easy to think you've already got pegged. I often think I have it pegged. That's why I blog about issues of sexuality, spirituality, and faith at Ruby Slippers. Recently, I wrote a really long post on what modesty is, and a Muslim woman who had converted from Reformed Christianity took me to task. She wrote on her own blog a point-by-point refutation of everything I had said, and then she came over to my blog to dialogue with me. I challenged her on my blog and said, your points don't make sense to me, because if Islam really gives women a chance to be protected by the veil, by the niqab, by the burqa, why is it that in Muslim countries women are not permitted to vote or go out in public or travel? And she wrote right back on my blog this response. Jonalyn, I'd like to know what kind of negative experiences you've had in the Middle East that lead you to make such sweeping criticisms of Muslim countries. I've spent a couple years in Egypt wearing the niqab, which is the head veil, and I've met hundreds of women from every Muslim majority country in the world, and hundreds of women that wear the niqab, and I am more than happy to share with you the fabulous experiences I've had. Why do you believe women are less powerful, valuable, or inferior in Islam? If you're going by the Western media, I'd be especially happy to share with you how vastly different it is from an insider's perspective. And then she's so wise, she put a happy face. I took her up on that. I wrote her a personal email and I said, I think you and I would have a lot to teach each other. Now, I am not about to convert to Islam. Let me be very clear about that. But I do believe that she is made in God's image, and she can teach me ways that I have misunderstood Islam so that I can better and articulately defend why Jesus makes us more fully human. And I don't have to be afraid. When I was in college, my Jewish roommate, who was also an atheist, told me after one really long debate, Jonalyn, I love debating with you because the more I debate with you, the more I'm sure I'm right. And I thought, I'm totally failing God. I'm not. And you're not failing God. We speak the truth as best we can, and we listen and we learn. And we find out that some of our ideas we thought were true about other people aren't. But this doesn't mean that Jesus isn't the way, the truth, and the life. Be quick to admit that you don't know as much as you thought. And those of you with apologetics degrees, this is even harder to admit, but do it. Admit it. People will love you for it. Finally, the last point. So let me just review them. First one, stop dominating, start discussing. Number 2, be well informed. Ask questions, get to know where this person's coming from. And 3, relax. You can't hold your tummy in forever. As Vicki Garrison said, I'm a humanist. I'm inclined to like you because we're both human. Relax. I sympathize with you in our mutual predicament as we both do our best to navigate this experience called life. I don't judge you. I don't expect perfection. It's fine with me if you have your own unique thoughts and opinions which are contrary to mine. That sounds a lot like something Jesus would say. I love you. I don't judge you. I'm near you. And yet there's some things about Vicki's response that I have trouble with. But I want to park on just one word she said. I'm a humanist. That word has fallen on really hard times. We accidentally always assume humanist means secular humanist, but it's wise to consider our adjectives. Just like feminists, I always want to find out what kind of feminist are you? Are you an atheistic feminist? Are you a Christian feminist? So with the word feminist, I tend to think that instead of comparing religions by right and wrong, which I do believe there are right and wrong religions, I think we can use this idea of humanism to help us talk about Jesus. How? Let me explain. A Dutch theologian named Hans Rookmacher once said something that sounded very controversial, but at core, I think it captures the entire essence of the gospel. Listen closely. Jesus did not come to make us Christians. Jesus came to make us more fully human. Jesus did not come to make us Christians. His plans are bigger than that. He came to make us more fully ourselves. The word human has it as its root, the word humus, which means in Latin, earth. That we are all human can be the reason we all have humility. We're all made of the same stuff. And I think that is the key for building a case for the beauty, truth, and goodness of the good news. When I meet up with a Buddhist, I want to ask him, how does Buddha make me more human? I read in a travel essay recently. It was entitled, Why We Travel. It was a great essay, and they were talking about all the reasons we travel, how we learn things, how we become more open-minded, and there was this one line that made me stop in my tracks, and I know I'm going to do a blog post on this question, is why I'm not a Buddhist, because of this line. Listen, this author said, I learned that women in Thailand sacrifice their bodies, quote, in order to protect their families, to become better Buddhists, end quote. And then she goes on to say, and that's why we shouldn't judge them. And I want to step back and say, I want to talk to a Buddhist in my town if human trafficking and prostitution is something the Buddha is actually inviting women to partake of. And if not, why did she write that? Because I have a suspicion based on my little knowledge of Buddhism that since Buddha teaches that the body is part of this illusory world, that what you do with your body is not as important as keeping the purity of soul and getting rid of karma. And I would want to talk to a Buddhist who believes that and say, is shedding your body helping you be more fully human? I want to take that question of, does this make you more human, and apply it to every major world religion? And as women in this room, this is a powerful way to do a comparative religious study. Compare the way every religious founder treated women. Did he see them as fully human or less than? And we need to ask that question of ourselves. Is your relationship with Jesus making you more fully male, more fully female, more fully yourself? Recently, we got together with some Buddhists at our house, and we asked them some questions, and they told us we were using reason too much, that we need to rely on our intuition and our emotion because reason was Western and linear thinking. And Dale said to them, why would I cut off part of my humanity to embrace the teachings of Buddha? I want a religion that is going to make use of every aspect of being human, not just my emotions. And these Buddhists looked at Dale, and I don't think they'd ever heard that before. They said, that makes a lot of sense. It's what Dale likes to call this, the human apologetic. And I think it works not just in sharing our faith, but in learning the good news for ourselves. Remember I told you I walked through the woods and I asked God for one thing to share with you? I think this is what he wants me to share. You in this room are more ashamed of your humanity than Jesus is. There's a common phrase that's thrown around Christian circles, and I want it to stop. It's a phrase that goes like this: well, what do you expect? I'm only human. Or I can't help that, I'm just human. Or I'm human, what do you expect? We blame our humanity for our fallenness. And we are broken, I know that, and we are limited. But we are not worthless. We are still made in God's image. I want to do a little update of the parable in Luke. Luke 15, the one about the coin, the lost coin. My mother-in-law, who I lost my second year of marriage, was an incredible scuba diver. And she used to take my husband and my sister-in-law, and they would go diving in the Caribbean. And she was a pilot, and she would travel from island to island and fly them around, and they would go just exploring the underwater world. And I think of Jesus kind of like a scuba diver who's hunting for this treasure. And he jumps off the boat, and he dives down, and you see the bubbles slowly dissipate until there's only one bubble left, and it pops, and he's gone, and he's diving, he's deeper, and he's deeper. And you wait, and there's not a ripple on the ocean, and you wait. And as you look down, there's a shadow way down deep. And as the shadow comes closer and closer, you begin to see the head of Jesus. But before you ever get to see his head break the surface, you see a hand shoot out of the water, and in it is clenched a beautiful gold coin. And that coin is us. He dove down into the depths, and he raises us up, fully human, and he rescues us from the darkness, brings us into the light, and he says, you were worth the journey. Don't give up the humanity. I made you to be human. With the goodness of hugs and cold lemonade, which sounds so good right now, and walking on crackling leaves in the autumn, and dipping our faces into cool basins of water, soaking in hot jacuzzi tubs, and giving the one we love a kiss, and feeling our son go like this on our arm. These are the things that make us human. And one day you will have a body much like it is right now. And you will live in that body forever and ever. People here in Los Angeles want to know if there's a man behind all the smoke and mirrors. They want to know if this man is a fraud or the real deal. My suggestion to the world is that this man is the best way I have found to deal with the darkness and struggles in my soul. This man is the way I have found to become more Jonalyn Grace Fincher. He is the man who has redeemed my femininity from being a curse to being a blessing. He is the man who has made me more fully human. And that is good news without any tricks.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.